Hello and a warm welcome to Federal's special program, Capital Beat. 2 days after Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met at the sidelines of the BRICS summit, China has claimed that India sought a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. Now, this is an official statement coming from the Foreign Ministry of the Chinese government, and this claim now has been refuted by New Delhi. Now, why are both Beijing and New Delhi in a denial mode? Does it indicate some kind of a breakdown of the informal and unstructured meeting which happened between Modi and Xi Jinping? We'll also talk about the larger takeaways of the BRICS summit. What have been the big takeaways and what kind of an impact is it really going to have on the upcoming G20 summit? Joining me now is former diplomat and strategic affairs expert, Mr. KC Singh. So thank you so much for joining on the Federal. And
thank you.
My pleasure, sir. And my first question, sir, is this denial, on both sides, with Chinese government officially saying that, it was New Delhi which sought a bilateral meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping, and then New Delhi again refuting this claim. What is the real indication behind this kind of a statement?
Look, exactly the same thing happened in case of the so-called Bali meeting a year ago, where India had said there was no meeting. And then subsequently, the Chinese let it be known that there was some kind of a meeting where a decision was taken that we'll move the relationship forward. And then, of course, New Delhi came back and said, yes, there was a meeting. So, there New Delhi was caught on the wrong foot. Now, this time again, I think the Chinese are very clearly trying to keep their leg up and basically make it appear that it's India which is seeking a meeting. Right. Now, why that impression is being created? Because there is the G20 summit coming up. And I think President Xi Jinping coming to Delhi and now being in Delhi, we can't say that Prime Minister will not sit down for a meeting with him. So before that happened, and you can also see there's a great urgency in the military-to-military talks. It's the 19th session of the discussions. But then very quickly, they've had the meeting, again, a second round of meetings very soon after the first at a slightly lower level in the army. So there is a certain desperation where I think Delhi wants at least some kind of a solution to the LAC intrusion, particularly at Dapsang Plains, which is very close to the Karakoram Pass. Right. Now, unless that takes place, how does India host President Xi Jinping? Because the opposition will ask them that he's come here, you invited him. You can't deny him a meeting. He comes to Delhi, you can't be brushing past him. And there'll be all kinds of bilateral meetings in Delhi. President Biden may sit down with him. Number of other leaders will sit down. It'll be odd if the host doesn't meet him. So it was understandable that the Indian government or Prime Minister may have wanted that let's at least find out whether the Chinese are willing to give some kind of, accept some kind of a pullback, which can then be marketed in India. Because don't forget, very soon thereafter, after this summit, we start the lead up to the Lok Sabha elections. By December, January, only about 3 months are left. The whole nation will be in an election mode. And this issue may not go away.
Right. So, Ambassador Singh, would one read this grandstanding as some kind of a political posturing which caters to the political constituency of Modi in India and the political constituency of Xi Jinping in China?
Absolutely correct, because there are, and this is a point I've made in the piece that I've written, which will come in the Free Press Journal tomorrow, that all the countries are having demands. All the 5 members of BRICS are having domestic issues. Brazil has a problem because after Bolsonaro, he's left an absolutely divided nation with law and order endangered, with environment endangered, deforestation, so on and so forth. So President Lula is really picking up the bits. In China, there is consensus now globally that the Chinese economy has slowed down. In the second quarter, they're even estimating it may be growth as low as 0.4%. So there is a slowdown. There is a double-digit unemployment amongst the youth. And there is the real estate indebtedness in crisis. So facing that, Xi Jinping can't be in a position where he's seen as stepping back.
Right.
And that's why he's so touchy about Taiwan, so touchy about national security issues, because he's having domestic problems because of the economy. Now, similarly, in case of Russia, we know the problem. They're right in the middle of Ukraine war. And South Africa, there are power cuts, the huge amount of power cuts. It was when apartheid finished. It was the most advanced country in Africa. Now, at the moment, you're having a situation where ANC is seen as involved in corruption. ANC is seen as rent takers in the economy. And you've got a country which is rich in resources having severe power cuts. And in India itself, well, Indian economy is all right, but we are facing an election too. So all the 5 members have this issue. So they're very touchy. And it was not a great moment at which you have a conference summit to decide the future of the organization.
Right. Absolutely. So that really tempts me to another question, and which is quite an obvious question, Ambassador Singh, and that is that what did Johannesburg BRICS summit at the end of the day achieve, except that saying that, look, we've increased the number of members, there's been an expansion in the members, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, they are the new members of the bloc. But does at the end of the day, the brand BRICS stands more efficient, stands more strengthened, or does it still look very, very diluted?
Look, first, there was clearly 2 major distractions. You had the Indian lunar landing, where Prime Minister was speaking to the nation. There's a live broadcast. So he was less focused on the conference and more focused on the lunar landing, which is understandable. But then he directly spoke to the nation, spoke to the scientists. So he was completely distracted from the conference. And second was Prigozhin's death in Russia. Right. So Putin, who could not attend because of the warrant against him from the International Criminal Court, then ups the ante by suddenly having Prigozhin drop out of the sky. So the global attention was focused on both these issues. The attention. And then the third thing, when the decision was taken to enlarge BRICS, it was said that there'll be a criteria and we'll explain it. Nobody explained the criteria. You can't understand why some of those members are there. So all that happened is, it's a usual thing which happens in any such meeting. They had trade-offs, and then that is why the Iranian president hasn't thanked us. He hasn't thanked Lula. He's thanking the Chinese president. What does that mean? That his case was being sponsored by the Chinese. Then UAE comes in. On what, by which yardstick does UAE qualify? It's their local population is not 1.5 million. It may be a rich country. It's got a few cities along the Gulf. It doesn't have much of a territorial this thing. So just being a rich man doesn't entitle you to join this club.
Right.
So why did they come in? Because if you're taking Saudi Arabia, if you're taking Iranians in, then you have to have the Saudis and the Emiratis in to satisfy the Americans that you were not playing the Chinese game. So the Chinese were insistent on, see very clearly, the Chinese and the Russians wanted the enlargement to be including countries which are largely seen as in their corner. And this becomes a platform for them to then use it to broadcast their views and posit it against the G7, G20, etc., etc. Now, India and Brazil won't accept that. Now, that is a question which arises. Why did we accept the Chinese ideas on expansion? We could have said, this is not the time to expand it. We'll see next year. Next year, it's in Russia. And Putin is the host. By then, maybe the Ukraine war will be over. Things will be more normal. Maybe global economy may have picked up. We'll decide at that stage. Why the urgency at this stage? What did India extract from the Chinese? All that we seem to have extracted is the Chinese embarrassing you later by saying you sought a meeting.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I was coming to the next question, Ambassador Singh, and that is that this expansion of the members within the BRICS bloc, would it now be seen as a political triumph for China and Russia maybe, and a big setback for India then?
No, not fully, because, Egypt has gone in and they are not in the Chinese corner. Egypt and UAE are seen as more probably West-leaning, pro-US. Saudi Arabia has been repositioning itself. As you know, the Chinese played a role in creating a bridge, a détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis have been defying the Americans by going along with the Russians for this OPEC plus oil production cuts, which has kept the oil price much higher than it should be or the Americans wanted. So the Saudis have been a bit defiant and repositioning themselves. And in fact, they are blackmailing the Americans at the moment, talking to the Chinese on a civil nuclear program in Saudi Arabia. Now, that's something very touchy because the Americans say, no, it has to have IAEA must supervise it properly because we don't want enrichment not to be properly supervised because you don't want another nuclear weapon power in the Gulf. But the Saudis are using discussions with the Chinese, because the Chinese obviously are offering a better and a cheaper deal to tip their nose at the Americans. So therefore, Saudis will not be seen as totally an American inclusion. So there's a balancing here where Americans are told, okay, Iran is in, but then you also got Egypt. So I said it's a give and take. So there is no criteria. They have not explained the criteria. Let them. Was it a population-based? Was it an economy-based criteria? Because that is how Jim O'Neill created or envisioned the BRIC. S came later. Even South Africa was really an addition because of the Chinese. Otherwise, originally in 2001, Jim O'Neill had talked of only 4 nations. And recently, when he's talked of BRICS again, he has said that it's really a non-starter other than India and China. None of the economies are really galloping as he had expected. And he added that
with the increasing memberships now, maybe more countries will join in from next year. This time it is just 6 countries. More and more countries will join in. Now, what does this bloc at the end of the day look like? Is it going to look like something where there'll be a China hegemony, China somewhat dominating India, or India is going to have an upper hand? Or is it going to be like a mutual interest? Because they did talk about a common currency and all that, but that hasn't come to a fruition at all. Looking at the pre-summit hype which was given, to the common currency, a common BRICS currency, all that has not shaped up at the end of the Johannesburg summit.
Look, one of the things that has been working is the new development bank. Not great, but it's been working. And the Emiratis, that is UAE and Egypt, had already put money in it. So to that extent, you can explain that they were brought in. But then Egypt is not a country with deep pockets. And why Ethiopia? The most populous country in Africa is Nigeria, if you want to bring a country in. Ethiopia is only the headquarters of the African Union. So how does Ethiopia qualify? So some of these names are just not very clear how they've been included. But essentially, more countries that you get, more difficult it'll be for this group to function, because you operate by consensus. And if they're already emerging 2 groups on it, one more comfortable with the Americans, one more comfortable with the Chinese. So you're going to bring that politics into BRICS, which was there. And now to say that this is a kind of a multipolarization is wrong. Because when India talks of a multipolar world, it's a phrase that started when the Cold War was there or the Cold War ended. Because non-aligned movement was really the answer to a bipolar world. Now, if the bipolarity now is Russians, Chinese on one side, the Americans on the other, then you're not being multipolar if you're with one of the poles. Because BRICS is very much with one of the poles. So you're actually supplement, or you are actually creating a balance within that pole. Then how is it multipolar?
So
it's
No, but then from what you're saying, I'm just picking on from what you just said. So does the BRICS bloc now look like a confused bag totally, whose purpose actually is not very, very clear? Because it was brought in with the idea to counter like G7, but it doesn't seem to be doing that because of its own internal contradictions.
No, it was not meant to counter anyone. It had basically come to, originally there used to be a group called G15. I'll write another piece about it. Everybody's forgotten about it. Now, this was created in Belgrade during the Belgrade non-aligned summit. They created a group of 15 countries. There were 5 from each continent. Now, here there was a criteria. There were 5 Asian countries, which had India, Indonesia, 3 more. there were 5 African countries and 5 Latin American countries. And these 15 used to, because NAM felt that it had become too large for it to negotiate with, say, on WTO, 15 will do it. But then the 15 really became a platform where individual countries say, Mahathir. I still remember I was with Vajpayee, I was spokesman of the ministry. We were in Jamaica and Mahathir was holding forth, against the Americans. Veer Sanghvi was with us and I was briefing the media, I was spokesman of the media, and everybody was foxed that what is this G15? Why has Vajpayee come here? And a few weeks before his bus journey to Lahore, so his mind was there. Why is he in Jamaica of all the places? And I just told everybody, I said, listen, this is a large group. We're reaching out to the West. So India is a bridge. We're a moderating factor in this. And he came back, wrote a column. He says the spokesman of the ministry, fibbed everyone. Very clever, he said, very shrewd. Gave an argument, which he says everybody lapped up. But essentially, nobody knew what is India doing there. So I was just thinking, the top of my head, I just gave that. So essentially, if you're going to get now 6 plus 5, 11, it's going to be another G15 with the addition that now you got China in it, a very big power, which wants to drive it. So the Chinese will try to drive it. So you'll have tug of war going on. And look, they already embarrassed India. You can see that. And this is the problem with symmetry. Kissinger has said this. He says symmetry is very dangerous because when things don't work at that level, there is no other level to go to. Right. Because if the foreign ministers mess up, you can always say the prime minister and the president will sort it out. So symmetry has a domestic component where you project it, build up your persona within your countries. Symmetry has a regional role to play. The country projects itself as sitting with other important countries, and it has a multilateral role. But it also, there the danger is that your bilateral differences, and this is what Jim has now said, the one who envisioned it. He says, if India and the Indo-Chinese relations are dysfunctional, then that group cannot work. The group of 5 couldn't work. Right. Now, if the group of 5 couldn't work, I don't know how the group of 11 is going to work.
But Ambassador Singh, then would it be right to just ask that, it's like a failed experiment now, even before it has taken off, and it won't look like a very strong geopolitical instrument?
Well, it's fun. I think the Americans will be watching it. The West is watching it with some amusement to see what's happening. They'll be satisfied that the Chinese and the Russians have not been able to totally hijack it. So essentially, it's a balancing to try to retain some, but it will not play its due role, which should be developmental, which should be on issues involving what is now called Global South. Right. Who was worried about Global South? When this was happening, as I told you, there are other things going on the sidelines. So there is projection of the leaders, there is their existing or lack of chemistry. So this will go on till a more normal state of international geopolitics returns. Right. And this is not going to be there while the Ukraine war is on, while the Americans are trying to contain the Chinese. The Indo-Chinese border is not, fully back to the normal. No, unless those things are back to some kind of normal state, none of these groups are really going to be able to function with any degree of satisfaction.
Absolutely. But Ambassador Singh, before the summit started, a lot was spoken and written about the de-dollarization. That was like one of the high ambitions of this BRICS bloc. But if you look at the statements coming at the end, probably it's like a more tame statement which talks about dealing in their own national currencies. So is that purpose now completely lost, or will they still be working in future for this goal?
You see, look at the driving force behind it. The driving force is Iran, because it's got sanctions. A bigger driving force is Russia, because they can't sell their oil. There are sanctions against them. So they're saying, okay, then you're going towards, it's a regressive step. Jim O'Brien, he says that, all right, you want de-dollarization, but can you lift capital controls in your countries? So how is yuan going to work? If the Chinese have capital controls, they're sentencing, big leaders of their private sector, and you pick up people. So unless there is openness in a country, the currency of which wants to become the international, as international as the dollar, then other things have to accompany it. And as long as there are capital controls, as long as you're closed societies, as long as you're autocratic, who's going to trust you? Yeah, Russians will trust you because no one else is buying their oil. So they'll say, okay, we'll buy it in yuan. Some trades may take place from India because the minute you use the dollar, the Americans get to know. So you can't pay in dollars. So you can do it while this clandestine thing is going on. But if it is back to normal trade, then till their capital controls are lifted and a country has the reserves, it has the economic strength, which US has, no one else, even the euro has not been able to create much of a splash, even though they got all the might of the European 24, 25 European countries. Despite that, the euro can't. So it's a larger issue, and I don't think it's that easy, but it's because barter arrangements are working to bypass the sanctions and beat the sanctions that the West has imposed. So you talk of de-dollarization.
Right. So we've been speaking to each other for the last almost like 20, 23 minutes, and we've discussed all the challenges. But then at the end of the Johannesburg summit, what has been the highest point of the summit? Do we have any positive takeaways at the end of the day?
No, positive is the enlargement. So they were talking of the enlargement. It could have become a contentious issue. India could have put their foot down and said, but then you see, we would also get entrapped. Because if the Chinese are, say, wanting Iranians in, Americans may not like it. We may not want to offend the Americans, but we also got our relations with Iran. Right. We may not necessarily be happy having countries like Iran sit in a group like that because the agenda gets hijacked or diverted. But at the same time, you can't be the one opposing them. Otherwise, the Chinese would be quite happy to affect your relationship with country X and say, India is opposing you, etc. So probably India was, we didn't have much of a choice. And we tried to make the best out of it that, okay, introduce some other countries that you think bring a little balance within BRICS, and that is what has happened. So how they function, we'll know from the next summit, but then the next summit is hosted by Putin. Yes. We don't know if the Ukraine war is still on and what is the state of the world. Right. So I think till there is some normalcy in the global geopolitics, none of these groups can really achieve the ends to which they were committed.
Right. So whatever paradigm framework they worked around with the expansion of the members, now just less than a fortnight, you have a G20 summit, which is coming up in India. Now, what is going to be the impact on the G20 summit? The way, the member nations have conducted themselves and the kind of framework they fixed for themselves, is it really going to have a fallout on the G20 summit?
Look, the 5 original members of the BRICS are also members of G20.
Yes.
Now, out of the new ones, probably and incidentally, the Saudis have said we are still thinking about it. Now, that's very quaint. You offer membership to a country. Haven't you first checked with them? Haven't they urgently approached you to join in? So how do you include them if they're still thinking about it? That itself is an embarrassment. You don't do that. You have to have people at your door, ready and ringing the bell, only then you admit them. Saudi is saying, we're sorry, we are in the desert somewhere. You sent an invite, we'll think about it. So, it's a bit strange, but the original 5, anyway there, Saudis will be there. I don't know how many, I don't think any of the others would be in the G20 out of them. So G20, I think Indo-Chinese Sino-Indian relations are probably more critical. But what's going to happen is we'll be playing host. But the focus when the big boys come will be on the big boys.
Right.
Say it's a meeting between Biden and Xi. I don't think they worry about India and, China. Because you're now talking of 2 major powers which have to settle global issues. Similarly, some of the other big boys when they're meeting, etc. So India as a host will have to make sure that it's convenient for these meetings. We can drive the agenda up to an extent because, we've been controlling it. being the host. But overall, like in case of BRICS, the geopolitics mars it. And Ukraine war will be right in the middle of it. There's no way you can deny it. The Chinese will be pushing their own thing. And the Chinese know that the Americans are trying to contain them. You may use any other word, but very clearly they're trying to deny them. And the Chinese are concerned because, they realize that they have an economic problem at home, though they'll keep denying it. So it's not a great time unless the Chinese are willing to step back. The best case scenario is that despite the public acrimony between India and China, if suddenly we see some movement, the LAC, and the Chinese, give India some cause for relief, where then there'll be greater warmth between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi when they meet.
Right. So my last question now is that how does it manifest for India? Will India have to do a lot of tightrope walking? It will have to tread cautiously? Because obviously, when geopolitical conditions are not conducive, it's not going to have an easy way.
Well, that's why, when the foreign ministers met, they couldn't issue a statement because there's no consensus on the paragraph on Ukraine. Then they went back to the paragraph used in the Bali thing. In a number of these meetings, they had to use the chairman's statement rather than a shared document, which everyone agrees on. So we don't know, but it's going to be a, difficult balancing game when you do it. But as usual, the focus will shift from the agenda of the conference to these bilaterals and meetings, which is in any case a very important part of the G20 summits, because the top leaders of the world get that opportunity to sit down and exchange views.
So all eyes now would be on the G20 summit, which takes place in the first week of September. Thank you so much, Ambassador Singh. It was wonderful having you on the program. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching this interview with the former diplomat KC Singh, send us your feedback, subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned to The Federal. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to The Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.